Hello everyone, welcome to US History. My name is Mr. Cash, and today we will be getting started on the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s and going from there over the course of this unit. So this is going to get us started on thinking about civil rights, what they meant then, how they are still relevant to us today, and some terms that we're going to want to keep in the back of our minds while we work through this unit. So first off, for this first slide, just want you to take a few seconds and think of what you think of when you hear civil rights. I've got a couple of questions there to get your minds working. Is it still going on? Is it over? Is there more work to be done? What do you already know? Who are some key figures that stick out to you? And what do you remember from previous experience with this topic? Okay, so what are civil rights? Civil rights are the legal rights that a citizen of a country, in this case focusing on the United States, that are guaranteed regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or physical or mental ability. This includes but is not limited to the right to vote, the right to a fair trial, the receiving of a public education, government services, so loans, financial aid, healthcare, housing help, food assistance, and social security. And civil rights are based on law and legislation. So some key ones that people usually think of are Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, which ruled the racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional. Hernandez v. Texas in 1954, which ruled which established equal protection under the law for Hispanic people. Civil Rights Act of 1964, outlawing discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, prohibiting discrimination for housing, and Obergefell v. Hodges, requiring states to recognize and license same-sex marriage. And these are just to name a few. Now, before we continue, be careful not to confuse civil rights with civil liberties. If you're not familiar with that term, we'll get right into it. So what are civil liberties? Well, civil liberties are rights and freedoms that are outlined in the Constitution, such as the freedom of expression, religion, assembly, due process, and bearing arms, to name a few. If you've ever been on Instagram or TikTok and come across something such as along the lines of the ACLU is suing so-and-so for this reason, they're basing it off of civil liberties. Now, they do have overlap, civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights, which are rights based on law and legislation, as we know, are based on civil liberties. So they are rooted in a civil liberty that's outlined in the Constitution. For example, when you hear civil rights about right to a fair trial, they are rooted in the civil liberty to due process law. Both promote equality and freedom, so that everyone has access to the same base level protections. Both also involve explicit government action and intervention. So, how do they differ if they are so similar? Well, civil liberties do not promote equity, which is the quality of being fair and equal. Let's go to a scenario to break that down. Say you have a fence. Perhaps there's a baseball game happening on the other side, and you've got three people who want to look over a fence to watch. You've got a tall person, you've got a short person, and you have a person in the wheelchair. Well, if you wanted to be equal to all of them, you'd give all of them a box to stand on. Now, the tall person was fine to begin with, but now they're like, fantastic, I have an even better view. The short person can just barely see over the fence, and the person in the wheelchair still can't see at all because they can't get up on the box. Now, what if you gave everybody two boxes? Well, same issue. The tall person is now essentially a giant. The short person's doing great, and our person in a wheelchair still can't get on a box. So, how would we make this equitable? You would give the short person two boxes, the tall person no boxes because they were fine to begin with, and the person in the wheelchair, you would offer them a ramp to get up onto a higher space so that they can see over the fence as well. This is what civil rights are protecting. So, going back to the African American civil rights movement, what are some key moments that we think of? One of them being Brown v. Board, 1954, desegregation of schools, as we mentioned, the Montgomery bus boycotts, which were started by Rosa Parks in 1955 when she refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man. This led to her arrest, and in protest, the African American community boycotted taking the bus. The one that I always think of, and the one that I personally always think is the most powerful, was the Greensboro sit-ins. Started in North Carolina in 1960 when 4 African-American college students sat at a lunch counter marked for whites only and refused to leave until they were served. Now, This one actually ended up spreading, and several hundred people throughout the South were arrested for trespassing, disrupting the peace, and disorderly conduct. Another one is the Freedom Riders. It was a group of both black and white activists who traveled from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans in May of 1961, stopping at restrooms and lunch counters, explicitly ignoring white and colored signs. So, going to some key figures and groups, we have Rosa Parks with the Montgomery bus boycotts. Thurgood Marshall, who was the first black man on the Supreme Court when he was initiated in 1967. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who's usually the person we all remember, especially for his I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington, letter from Birmingham jail, and leading the SCLC. Speaking of, that stands for Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They are a civil rights organization based in Atlanta, Georgia, and continued to lead nonviolent protests. Another group you may or may not be familiar with is the NAACP, or National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which was founded in 1909 by W.E.B. Du Bois and Mary White Ovington, among others. And this is a civil rights organization that means to eliminate racial discrimination and ensure equal rights for all people. They actually still are active, both of these actually, which I think is pretty amazing. Then we have Malcolm X, who was a speaker for the Nation of Islam and a leader in the civil rights movement. And he was a black nationalist and inspired the Black Panther Party, who fought for black liberation and anti-racism. So these were just a few of the key figures and moments in civil rights history, again, primarily African-American rights, and also some terms that we're going to be continuing to use and learn about. But leave your questions and comments in the comments below, and thank you for watching.